Burkina Faso has just revealed something groundbreaking, an airplane that was fully designed and built within Africa. No borrowed technology, no foreign help, and no Western design plans. So how did this small West African country pull off something even wealthy nations struggle with? And why is the West suddenly feeling uncomfortable? Let's take a closer look. At first, no one believed the whispers. For weeks, stories were quietly spreading around Ouagadougou. They said a local team of engineers from Burkina Bay was working on something big, something that would surprise the world. Still, most people remained doubtful. How could a landlocked nation in the Sahel, better known for its history of uprisings than its aviation industry, actually build a real airplane from scratch? Then came the day it all became real. No grand event in Paris, no approval from Brussels, no speeches at the World Bank. Just a crowd of everyday people, students, farmers, workers, elders gathered to witness something they had only heard about in passing. When the hangar doors opened and the polished silver aircraft appeared, the crowd fell silent. Not out of shock, not with loud celebration. Just stillness, the kind that fills the air when a dream steps into reality. Because this wasn't just a plane, it was proof. Proof that African countries don't need to wait for technology to be handed to them. Proof that engineering skills aren't limited to one part of the world. Most importantly, proof that Burkina Faso is carving out its own path, instead of asking for a place on someone else's. And this wasn't a showpiece meant for display in a museum. The plane moved, it lifted off, it flew. And in that moment, something else took flight, to African imagination and pride. The issue has never been about lack of talent. African nations have always had brilliant minds. But for decades, that talent was shaped to serve foreign companies, foreign patents, and foreign goals. Young students were taught to think globally, which often just meant learning how to work for others. Maybe a part would be developed in Burkina Faso, but it would carry a European brand. A skilled technician in Mali might fine-tune the engine, but the profit would end up overseas. This aircraft changed that pattern. It shifted who gets credit. It raised big questions. Who is allowed to create? Who gets to imagine a bold future, not just a borrowed one? As the plane soared above Ouagadougou, the crowd below felt more than excitement. They felt something deeper. Why is this happening now? The truth is, this flight didn't appear out of nowhere. It was the result of years of quiet frustration, untapped potential, and a growing hunger for independence. For far too long, African countries have relied on solutions that came from the outside. This time, they built their own. Health problems? Call the WHO. Need security? Bring in American experts? Want better roads and buildings? Ask the French. That's the pattern many African countries have followed for years. But, under President Traoré, Burkina Faso took a different path. He didn't ask what they could import. He asked what they could create. That shift in thinking didn't just stay in speeches. It became real policy. His government quietly started putting money into local talent, backing science and engineering schools, and saying no to outside help that came with strings attached. Most importantly, Traoré told his people, "You don't need permission to build your future." That mindset is what gave birth to the plane. It wasn't about signing deals, it was about believing in themselves. This kind of belief has been denied to African nations for a long time. Not by chance, but by design. That's why this plane matters so much. Not because it instantly changed the economy, but because it challenged a long-standing idea that Africa must always follow others' rules. This wasn't a protest or a loud uprising. It was something more powerful, true independence taking flight. And while the launch was calm and technical, it made a lot of noise in global capitals. When the plane landed, the people of Burkina Faso were proud, but they weren't the only ones watching. The real attention came from the West, from places that had long dismissed or ignored Africa's potential. Now, they were watching closely, and not just with curiosity. They were nervous. So why would one aircraft from Burkina Faso cause unease in powerful Western countries? Because the moment that plane touched the ground again, something had changed. Silent alarms were going off in offices across Europe and the US, in London, Berlin, Washington, and Paris. The worry wasn't just about what Burkina Faso had built. It was about what the plane represented: a break in the system. For years, the West didn't need to use force to keep control. Control came through money, tech access, and control over knowledge. If an African nation wanted progress, they had to sign contracts, accept advisors, and follow outside reforms. But now, here came a small, landlocked country with no billion-dollar tech firms, no long aerospace history, and they had built something powerful. On their own terms. That was never supposed to happen, and that's why it caused panic. It wasn't just about the aircraft industry being challenged. It shook a deeper belief that Africa couldn't move forward without outside help. Suddenly, phone calls were flying. Defense contractors in Europe wanted a closer look. US companies started offering support to scale up production. But let's be clear, this wasn't admiration. It was about control, monitoring, and making sure things didn't go too far. Western leaders were especially uneasy because this aircraft didn't just show skill, it showed strategy. It pointed to a different kind of leadership, one that doesn't ask to join the old system but builds a new one instead. And this isn't the first time something like this has happened. Years ago, Gaddafi's Libya tried to launch a Pan-African satellite project, so African countries wouldn't have to pay Europe for telecom services. That effort didn't threaten anyone's life, but it did threaten power. And back then, the West got nervous too. Now, that same nervousness is back. Why? Because this plane doesn't just represent freedom. It hints at something even more powerful: Africa taking full control of its own future. What's stopping Mali from being next? Or Niger? Or even Chad? If Burkina Faso can pull this off, what happens if other African nations start investing seriously in their own industries, energy systems, advanced tech, cyber tools, not just farming and clothing? The carefully built system of foreign dependence begins to crumble. And that worries Western intelligence circles more than they let on, especially when it comes to the imbalance of power in global security. A homegrown aircraft isn't just for commercial use. It lays the groundwork for future military aviation, border patrol, surveillance, and transport strategies. If African nations develop their own flight capabilities, the West's usual justification for staying in the region, security instability, starts to fall apart. Western powers aren't panicking over just one aircraft. They're panicking because something is slipping out of their hands: control. And the more they react, the more their double standards show. For decades, they've been saying Africa should find African solutions. But now that an African country actually has, they respond not with support, but with suspicion. The fear goes deeper than just strategy, it's also emotional. Because if Burkina Faso, once labeled too unstable to do anything significant, can pull this off, then the whole way the West sees and relates to West Africa has to change. And that shakes the very foundation of a system built on the idea that Africa should always be behind, not leading. So what happens now? And before we move on, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more videos. This kind of momentum can only be stopped one way, and the West knows it. They've used the same playbook for generations. Weaken the message and split the movement. Undermine the win. Plant doubts. Suggest outside involvement. Suddenly, rumors start to fly. This must be Russian-backed. Or maybe it's Chinese tech with a new label. Anything to avoid admitting what's plain to see this was built by African hands. That the raw materials come from local soil. That this wasn't shipped in from Europe. That it's being designed in Ouagadougou, not Brussels. But what many in the West don't realize is this. Their moment of control is over. And the world is now paying attention to a new generation of partners. These new partners aren't offering contracts with strings attached. They're offering real tools with no hidden terms. Meanwhile, Western analysts keep circling the same uncomfortable question. How? How did a country with no aerospace history build something so advanced and keep it under wraps until takeoff? Their internal reports whisper assumptions, not facts. They can't believe this happened without outside help. But they're missing the point. It happened because Africans did it themselves. Maybe the critics are right, but not in the way they think. Yes, the aircraft was built using resources from Burkina Bay, but it wasn't some sudden miracle. It came from a growing network of quiet partnerships. These partnerships weren't flashy or publicized. They were built on shared respect, similar struggles, and a common unspoken mission: to break free from the West's control over infrastructure, knowledge, and power. At the center of this quiet shift are three names that make Western governments nervous: North Korea, China, and Russia. Burkina Faso hasn't shared any details about who helped, and none of these countries have admitted to playing a role. But if you're paying attention, the pattern is clear. Since France's influence in the region has faded, Russia has become more active in the Sahel. Instead of lectures, they offer military training, infrastructure advice, and defense tools through cooperation. China, meanwhile, has gone beyond roads and buildings and is now focused on sharing technology, often promoting its own model of government-led innovation to African nations. North Korea, while secretive, has a history of quietly trading aircraft knowledge with friendly countries. What links these three nations together? They've all been pushed to the edges of the global system by the West. But they've also learned how to survive and succeed under pressure, sanctions, and isolation. And now, they've found willing partners in Africa, places where their way of doing things is not only accepted, but welcomed. This isn't about Burkina Faso joining a new axis or declaring loyalty to one side. There are no flags, no alliances, no treaties. This isn't a new Cold War. It's something more subtle, more strategic, built on shared tools, shared goals, and a refusal to follow the Western rulebook. What makes this approach powerful isn't just politics, it's pride. When North Korean engineers offer industrial designs without preaching, when China helps build digital systems without moral lectures, and when Russia sends military equipment without demanding political changes, it's not just practical help. It's a sign of respect. After years of being talked down to, bribed, or bullied by Western institutions, African leaders are asking a simple question: why work with those who mock us when others treat us as equals? There's more to this moment in Burkina Faso than an airplane. It signals a shift, a new model of progress based on cooperation, not dependency. And that's the part Western powers didn't see coming. These new partnerships don't demand loyalty. They offer options. That plane built in Ouagadougou may be the first of its kind, but it likely won't be the last. That's what truly unsettles the old powers. It might inspire other nations not just to build, but to look elsewhere for support. Instead of offering restrictions, Moscow, Beijing, and Pyongyang are providing tools. And sometimes, tools are all a driven continent needs. This moment also redefines what foreign influence looks like in Africa. In the past, it meant exploitation, interference, or control. But this new kind of influence aims to unlock local talent, not replace it. So, when Burkina Faso started this project, they didn't hand it over to foreign engineers. What they needed was training, materials, and software. The rest? That came from within. What truly unsettles the West isn't missiles or tanks, it's something far more powerful. African countries working with global partners who don't demand loyalty to a specific ideology. When strong, independent leadership meets open partnerships, it creates a force that's unpredictable, impossible to control, and hard to stop. But the impact runs even deeper. If this quiet cooperation continues to grow, not just in Burkina Faso, but also in places like Mali, Niger, Guinea, Ethiopia, and beyond Africa, will no longer be just a battlefield for global powers. It will step into its own role not as a pawn, but as a true player. And that leads to a bigger question. What kind of Africa is being shaped when countries start moving forward with confidence, on their own terms, using their own tools? Power doesn't always announce itself with noise. It moves slowly, quietly, and when it's real, it doesn't reverse. What happened in Burkina Faso wasn't just symbolic. It was real, and thousands of people saw it take flight. To those paying attention, that moment signaled something deeper, something that has been building beneath the surface of a continent that has been bruised but never broken. This isn't just about planes, technology, or new alliances. It's the rise of a different kind of Africa. An Africa that no longer waits for foreign approval, no longer measures progress by Western praise. This Africa moves with clarity, confidence, and purpose. And that alone is more dangerous to the global status quo than any weapon. For decades, the West shaped a specific story about Africa, a story of dependency, of never-ending reforms, of always being in development. Africa wasn't meant to disappear. It was meant to stay manageable as a consumer, a client, and a supplier of raw materials. But leaders like Captain Ibrahim Traoré are tearing that story apart. This new wave of African leadership isn't asking, how do we catch up with the West? They're asking, how do we build our own model, in our own language, by our own rules? The aircraft in Burkina Faso is one answer. But it's far from the only one. Across the continent, quiet revolutions are happening. In Guinea, leaders are reclaiming control of mining operations to benefit their people, not just foreign investors. In Mali, rebuilding military and tech infrastructure is no longer about following France, it's about standing on their own. In Ethiopia, major energy projects like the Grand Renaissance Dam show that power doesn't need outside permission to become real. In Tanzania, homegrown vaccine research is changing how science is done and who gets to lead it. These aren't isolated efforts. They're connected by a deeper mindset shift. For the first time in modern history, many African nations are embracing a single powerful idea. We don't need the West to rise. And once that idea takes root, the institutions built on dependency start to collapse. You can even see it in how Western reports are written now. They're not talking about helping Africa grow anymore. Now they're warning about losing influence in Africa. It's a small change in words, but a massive shift in power. The reactions from young Africans are even more powerful. For years, they were told to dream about cities like Paris, London, and New York, as if success could only be found far away. Now, many of them are dreaming about places like Addis Ababa, Bamako, and Ouagadougou. They are seeing something different, strength growing from within. This is what the new Africa looks like. It's not just about building industries, but freeing the mind. It's a spirit of unity across the continent. For Traoré, keeping the aircraft's development in Africa was more than pride. It was a smart move. He knew one country's rise could be fragile, but a continent-wide awakening? That's unstoppable. When that happens, defense turns into partnership. Trade becomes protection. Innovation means true independence. Of course, there are challenges: bans, false information, and economic pressure. Western media tries to paint these leaders as dictators or unstable. But these stories lose power the more they are told. Why? Because everyday Africans are seeing real results. Factories are being built, currencies are stabilizing, borders are being defended. Burkina Faso's airplane was more than just a machine. It was a reflection proof of what African nations can achieve when they stop asking for permission and start building their own future. And that's what worries the West the most. A united Africa, not a dependent one. Ethiopia is producing power, Nigeria is making chips, and Burkina Faso flies planes made at home. For those who want Africa to stay divided, this is the worst news. Because once African countries stop competing and start working together, a new power will rise on the global stage. Not one controlled by America, Asia, or Europe, but something new. Something African. What do you think? Can we end Traoré and truly free Africa? Will the West resist this change? Share your thoughts on how tough this freedom would be in the comments below. If you want to see more videos like this, hit the bell icon and subscribe. We're bringing you stories no one else talks about. Thanks for watching, and don't miss the next video.